welcoming all of you and, of course, our special guest, Dr. Khaled ElSherbini from Egypt, but lived in many different countries, in the Ukraine, in the United States, and traveled many countries, and is an amazing consciousness teacher in the widest sense, and started Enneagram Egypt. We met initially in my 26-week online training around integral relationships, and then he came with his wife to our 5-day life workshop in Avan and did some special evening events there for us. And then, to my total surprise, he invited me on a retreat, they called it, but it was sort of like a travel retreat, or to Egypt, which was amazing. And there were about 30 of his students, some of them from other countries, mainly from Egypt. And we traveled from the Nubian country all the way in the south of Egypt, south of Aswan, where the first dam is, all the way to Luxor. And we stayed a few days in the Nubian country. And so, I mean, you could say that too, but I'll just say it, for Dr. Khaled said it's sort of like a journey from the archaic world of the Nubian people to, I don't know, where the egocentric,
in all the
or the magic, I should say, right? And then the egocentric,
the big mighty statues would be the egocentric, and the symbol and all these areas.
Okay. And the old temples and things like that, so impressive. And then, so like into the mythic world, right? And then into Cairo, where there is a lot of modern aspects. And so that was just in itself already a transformational experience. And so there were some Americans, and a woman from the UK and a woman from Germany, and I knew some of them. And on the last, and another man, Eric, from America. And on the last day, I made sort of like, in hindsight, maybe a bit of a flippant remark that I said there is basically no green consciousness here, and how can these people even advance into the green pluralistic state of consciousness if there is no opportunity to practice, or to have an environment where they can embody and practice this. And then this small group of people, we had a discussion around that evening, and that really sort of like shifted a lot in my perspective, because I had never, except for Turkey, been in an environment like that. And I had a few other insights that I will share along the way and tonight. And then in the morning, 2 hours or an hour before I had to leave for the airport, I don't know if you already had heard about what we were discussing, or if I shared it with you. I also stayed at his house. And we got into this conversation, and I almost missed my flight, and I need to go, and we were just like, we couldn't stop. And so I made my flight, but barely. And so Dr. Khaled said, we should continue this conversation sometime. And so that's, I think, the main reason why you're here
to visit you, and then we can continue the conversation.
We can continue the conversation. And except for sleeping, we pretty much now had a conversation ongoing since then, and it's not finished. And I have a feeling it will never be finished. And and maybe some people out there or who watch the video or so can correct me, but the integral model, which Ken Wilber developed, was developed pretty much in an American, or completely inside an American cultural context. And of course, Wilber read thousands of books, and is also deeply steeped in Eastern spirituality, mainly Buddhism. But he hasn't traveled much. And I grew up in Germany. I lived 35 years of my life in Germany, and then moved in '95 to California. And in 2006, so 11 years after I moved to California, I learned about integral theory. So by then I already had adopted a lot of the green stage Californian, moved basically from my orange rational stage into the green stage, and then, became integral and wrote 3 books about integral relationships, but was, never really thinking about, that there is any other interpretation or view on the integral model, even though very early on I met a woman and she said, yeah, the problem with integral is that it's not multicultural, right? And I said, oh, what do you mean, right? I mean, we read all the books and she either didn't want to explain it to me or didn't explain it to me. Maybe somebody else had said it and she just, I don't know. I was just like, since then, like for all these years, I was thinking, what did she really mean? How can this not be multicultural, right? And even though I'm now in Turkey for 4 years, or at the time I was here 3.5 years, I didn't have these insights that I gained at the end of this trip in Egypt, which I think were very profound. And maybe, I'm not totally sure, but there aren't that many people who have studied integral theory like in the entirety as you have in we just call it the East right now, and what we mean is mainly the Middle East, right? Not the Far East, right? Just to simplify that, here is the East represented, here is the West represented, if you will, and I came to Istanbul in 2000. When did I come here? 2020. Now I'm losing my track. So 2018. Wow, it's already 4 years. And I was invited by a coaching company here that took an integral approach to their coaching, but I learned very quickly that they basically just use the stages of development in a kind of adopted it in a crude Wilberian way, and maybe a little bit of quadrants, but they didn't use the whole model. So I never had any kind of engagement with them the way I have with Dr. Khaled. And so we may be even the only people who explored these differences on this level ever, because I went to several integral conferences worldwide over the years, and there were never any people from the Islamic Arab Islam world or the Eastern culture. You were sort of like the first one, and we're slowly learning from each other. We're mainly disagreeing on
We've almost agreed on nothing, but
that at least we
which
agree
is good,
on.
by the way.
Yeah, this is what we agree on, right? And so this is just, I mean, for me, an amazing. It's not my real field of interest and expertise, but it flows into my field of interest of relationships, right? Of one-on-one relationships, intimate romantic relationships. And so, yeah, we just wanted to share a little bit of our discussion and our insights, and also mainly of our different views on things with you, and invite your feedback. And the people who are on Zoom, please, if you have any questions or suggestions or feedback, type it into the chat window, and then Özor and Sarah, who are here with me, some of my team members, will relate these questions to us. Yeah. So if you just reflect a little bit on on how we came to this point, and then
thank you, Martin,
frame it a little bit
for this introduction. So as Martin said, I mean, I got introduced to my journey was basically initially a spiritual journey that went into many studies. And during these studies, I discovered integral theory and spiral dynamics before the integral theory, plus many other models. And it was clear to me the spiral and then the integral are magnificent models, but they are interpreted from a certain cultural perspective. And in some cases, there was conflating or like mixing the drives of a stage with the manifestation of a stage. So how the integral describes the movement from one stage to another and describes the motives and the core characteristics of each stage were enlightening, magnificent. But then in some discussions, usually not in the books, but in discussions, I would see people very much stuck into their view of this stage has to look like this. This stage has to look like this. Or if you don't have this, you don't have this stage. While the original theory doesn't include that. The original theory actually talks about, as you put it in your book, basic characteristics and limited views. And how these basic characteristics and limited views need to be transcended, the basic characteristics included, and the limited views cleaned up. And this happens in very different way from one culture to another culture. Now, I wouldn't say that that was clear to me yet before I met Martin. It was just clear that this is biased to what I would call a Western white male. This is a Western white male model. But I didn't have enough insights to see where the problem is. And I didn't need to study that. So when you talked about introducing the integral. I don't know, I'm not sure, but I think I have the most comprehensive integral program in Egypt for sure, and maybe in the Middle East, I don't know. And I would even call it stages of the mind, because in many of what I would teach, I would say stuff that I know is not in the books. I know it's not there. And sometimes when I would teach it to Westerners, they say, that's not there. I know it's not there. That's why this is stages of the mind. Come and I'll tell you why. And most people would stay and understand and see the differences. Until, as Martin said, he was in Egypt and we had that discussion the day he was leaving. So I didn't know that you already had opened that discussion before with them. And it was fascinating. It was really a very nice thing. But then I got caught into some statements that caught me by surprise. One of them was, no one here is green. It's like, I didn't even answer because to me, it wasn't about, no, there are green people. It's not, there are, no, there are not. No, it's not, this is not the idea. It's like, why would you see or would you think that no one is green? The question that came to my mind, what is the perception that is causing the judgment that no one here is green? While these people I have been teaching for years, and I have seen their movement, I know the general mythic public, I know the what we call, let's say the modern, the orange, I know these people, and I know the progress these people have gone beyond mythic and beyond modern, beyond rational, and I've seen them move into green. Under my own hands, I have seen the difference and the shifts. And I have given them all kinds of assessments. So they have taken Natasha Todorovic's assessment, which is Chris Cohen, and they have taken the value match assessment. And in most of these assessments, many of them are either core green or have a lot of green in them. The answer the question at my point at that was, it's not like they are green. They could be anything. It doesn't matter. They could be whatever they can be. They can be blue. It doesn't matter. But what is the limited view that is causing such a judgment? I must say that was to me the main trigger. What is the West not seeing? And as Martin said, that opened the discussion. And we hardly had time before he traveled. Martin was very interested to continue it at the time. At the time, it wasn't really in my core. But I wanted to see Martin as a friend, to come to him and to go deeper into this. I must say the last 3 days have been fascinating, really fascinating, beyond imagination. Why? Because they allowed us to discover things that we felt. It's like, I feel there is something here. And as Martin said, we almost agreed on nothing. It's like there were so many differences between us, but at least there's something we can talk about now. We can say, I see it like this, I see it like this. And so this discussion has allowed content that can be discussed in an organized fashion. So that's basically the background from my side. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I have a few bullet points here, and we already had a Zoom in January with 40 or 50 people from all kinds of different countries where we touched on this a little bit, but it didn't go anywhere near to the depth what we have explored now. And so the first one, I think, where we agree at least to a certain point, And I don't know if you can swing over so we can see the whiteboard a little bit. Move the camera. Is that, and again, this is like something I have never really thought about until we had our conversation, is that if you look at these first 4 stages, in very broad strokes, we can see that humans, or most people believe, I always say most people believe, that humans came out of Africa, right? So that's how the world got populated, out of Africa. So in the archaic stage, I would maintain that basically came out of Africa, right? And evolutionary. And then, we know how humans spread around the world. And then when humans became self-conscious, and that was still mainly in Africa and maybe in the northern part of Africa and maybe parts of what we see as Iran and Iraq and Turkey, right? And so this is basically where in my limited knowledge, where the magic stage, the tribal stage, right, where people lived in communities of 100, 200, roaming, right? They hadn't settled, they were nomadic, they were roaming around, emerged, and then the egocentric stage, so like we're probably already moving out a little bit more into the world. Attila the Hun, and you're much more educated with all these, but we know these wild hordes, right, that went out there, right? You have a question?
Can we take the whiteboards around here because it's not showing from the camera.
It's not showing? Yeah? Is this good?
No, it's reflecting. Yeah.
Ah, it's okay, then we'll just, audio needs to be sufficient. You get the visual, right? And then the mythic stage, if we look at basically all religions that have survived, at least, or made it out in the world, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they all emerged, and you correct me if I say something fundamentally wrong, right? They all emerged.
Everything is wrong.
Just
kidding.
Now I'm covering you up.
No, you're okay. I'm sitting.
Stay over here. Emerged in this area here. So that's what we basically agree on. And then my view, where we disagree a little bit, but there is also some level of agreement, is that basically the culture here. And again, this is where it gets tricky, right? More or less kind of like got stuck or kind of settled in this mythic worldview. And of course, this is still present, right, to this day. When you know what a Islamic, I don't know, is fundamentalist is not really what I mean, but conservative, orthodox, traditional Islam, okay, right? Is of course still alive here in Turkey and in many parts of the Arab world, right? And what my understanding so far was, and I'm open to revise that to an extent, is to us integral people, I think I can say that with some level of certainty, we basically maintain that modernity, right, the rational worldview. Of course, we know that Plato and Aristotle kind of like developed a scientific method, and that there was some science, but it never had that impact that science had, that came basically with in the 16th century with Newton and Columbus and Copernicus and all these inventors, right? And then on the philosophical side, Descartes and Kant and Hegel and Hobbes and all these modern basically philosophers who started modernity, which then started the industrial revolution, and then we got late modernity with iPhones and democracy in my definition, right? This is something where we don't really agree what is democracy, right? And so and many people have written about that. Jürgen Habermas, who Ken Wilber drew a lot from, and I'm somewhat familiar with, a German philosopher, is basically that the innovations, right, of the rational and higher worldviews, they were partly then adopted by societies at these earlier levels. And they often adopted the technology, but not the values that produce these technologies, right? And what I still feel a little bit, and I think that became more clear to me today, is so like this adopting is often a little bit, we take this, but not this, right? And we take that, but not this, right? And so when we then look at these higher stages, at the pluralistic stage, so first of all, I want to say, I'm sure there is a lot of people in the Eastern world or in the Middle East who cognitively, understand, these higher level, the rational, the pluralistic, the integral, and higher. But what I questioned in Egypt is, yes, cognitively they can learn about the pluralistic stage, but it has not naturally emerged there. And I basically just questioned, how can they be pluralistic, and that's true for Turkish people too, at this green level of consciousness, if they have no opportunity. Either it's verboten, right, like frowned at in your community to practice this, or there's just no opportunity, or you have no role models. You don't even, you can cognitively learn about it, but you don't know how to embody it, right? And I don't want to go now into examples, but I try to introduce some more deeper green practices, pluralistic practices here. And I had team members leave and said, you cannot do that here, right? This is like, I can no longer work here, right? Because what you do here is illegal, basically, which is not, but so like on the, right? And so I say, how can you guys practice my form of experience of the green stage if it's socially not supported, or if it's frowned at, or maybe even, not legal? And that touches on many parts. And then so that was like my view that emerged, and you will then give your view. And on the other side, I must also admit that, we Western or integral people, or in general, we know very relatively little, really culturally, specifically as far as Islam is concerned, right, about the emergence from here. And so where our discussion goes, when I come in with my experience here, right, not only my knowledge, but my experience growing up in Germany and then living in California, Northern California, Southern California, which is also culturally different, right, and now I live here, then I often feel that Khaled gets kind of defensive, right? So, oh, here's the white, arrogant, Western view, know-it-all, right? And we have developed all these stages, and you just kind of adopt them. And we have to teach you down here how you can get up here. And on the other side, he then pushes back with his wealth of knowledge, right? And I say, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know anything about Islamic history, right? I mean, nil, right? And then I feel now you level all this stuff on me, and I have no defense, right? And I'm not really so interested. I'm interested about up here, and say, no, you need to understand up here, and we were already pluralistic, whatever, 1,500 years ago, and we were already in the rational stage, and it was just so interesting when I was in Turkey, in Istanbul, in Cairo, in Egypt, that our guide kind of didn't get tired to say, oh, nobody could build these pyramids, right? They tried in the West. No modern company could ever build these pyramids. And we were so much more evolved 3,000 years ago that the West. So there is this thing, that was kind of this thing to, whenever there was an opportunity to show how Egyptian culture is even nowadays, in a way, ancient culture, somewhat ahead of the West, right? And that, of course, then creates some defensiveness in me. So this is one thing that we touched on. I just say one other thing, then we can put this into context. And this is where we agree in principle. And you already pointed to that the stage development is basically driven by, as you already said, by solving the problems of the previous stage. So this is basically Habermas, but probably spiral dynamics, and Wilber would agree. right? That these stages, of course, emerged chronologically. Right? Nobody is born into this stage, and no culture started in this stage. So, and as Dr. Khaled already said, is that initially each stage develops its basic capacities, and if we have time, we can get into that, but I want to move forward so we can touch on all the topics and then we can go into details. But eventually it also creates pathologies. It creates some negative effects, some negative outcomes, which are then solved in the next higher stage. Right? The problems are addressed in the next higher stage, which then eventually also creates its pathologies. And what we're agreeing about is and this is a good and a bad thing, right? And I'm leaning more sort of even to the Eastern perspective, but because what the Westerners tend to do is that when they grow to the next stage, they exclude all the aspects of the previous stage, at least from sort of like a philosophical standpoint or from a value standpoint, right? So when they move from magic to egocentric, they reject anything on the magic level. Or I give a more concrete example. And I grew up in that kind of society when people went to the mythic to the rational level in Germany. I was in Germany when that happened. They left the church, they became agnostic, they wanted to have nil to do with anything religious or any values, like being faithful to your wife or having family values and following certain rules. They went like, we're done with this is all bad, right? This is the new standard. This is, anybody who's not here, they're somewhat retards down here, they're crazy, they're whatever, right? They got totally rejected. And then when you get to the next higher level, which is a response to the rational level, this pluralistic level, now you fight anything that has to do with commercialism, with materialism, which destroys the environment and represses women and doesn't elevate the feminine, right? And people get very then identified with the next higher level. And Ken Wilber, they just sent out an email 3 days ago where he exactly describes this. Like when we get to the next higher level, we repress everything or transcend, we call that, everything from the previous level. So that's a strong tendency in the West, which I would agree with, right? From my own experience going through some of these levels and observing others. And what became clear to me in Egypt relatively, or I don't know when it became clear, but during that time, was that in the East, they do kind of like the opposite thing. They also transcend, but they include everything from before. And what that means is they include the limited views, but also the good basic capacities. And the people in the West have a tendency to exclude the basic positive qualities, or whatever you want to call it. But on the plus side, they also transcend the limited views. And now this is basically a whole book and a PhD thesis. Who decides what should be included and transcended, right? Because the Westerners made up the ideas what should be included and what should be transcended, which you only really see, at least according to Wilber, at the integral level. So your consciousness, your mental complexity only emerges at the integral level to even address questions like that, right? Where you get interested in the previous stages, because the people here are not interested in the previous stages. They're only interested in their stage, right? And so naturally, you could say people in the East, they would be more open and interested, but still they cannot see the stages unless you get to the integral level. And I think this creates not only problems in the East and West, this transcending and excluding in the West and transcending and including in the East, but it also creates problems between the two cultures, right? Because we look to the East and say, why are they still Muslims and all this Islam stuff, and they're all terrorists, and right? There's like all these judgments about Islam in the Western world out of ignorance, because the Western people, unless they're still Christians, right? They say, well, we're done with religion. They said religion is basically all bad. We moved on. But a lot of people here didn't move on, right? Or at least from our perspective. And I just say one thing, right, where we Westerners don't understand that some women here veil themselves or wear the burqa, right? And from an Eastern perspective, I now realize for many women this is really a choice. Even I had a friend here, she never wore any kind of traditional clothing and studied in America and was the assistant to the Syrian president's wife, totally modern. And at one point she decided to wear the burqa or at least the hijab, and right, and that was her choice. Her family was actually saying, "Why are you doing that?" Right. So we Westerners don't understand that for some women this is a choice they did not make out of cultural pressure or religious pressure, and that's just like one example, right? Which any Western person would say, no, that's not true. They're repressed. They're not free, right? It's the patriarchy and all these, all these things. And so that comes partly from that. So there are a few more aspects, but I'll let you chime in on this line here, right? This is the East, this is the West in my, or in integral traditional thinking, right? And the East adopted some qualities of the West here, values and products and stuff, but not all of them, right? And so now, and then the transcending, include and exclude.
Okay. So that's very interesting, Martin. And every time you speak, I get so many more ideas. And as usual, I could speak a lot, but I'll try to narrow it down to a few points. So this is a developmental model. And the developmental model means that there is a developmental dynamic happening through each of these stages. And that's why looking at a model like this, personally, I mean, this is my way of looking at things, I cannot cut out history. The historic context in which the developmental stages happened is essential to understanding the model. It's not a snapshot. We cannot just go to California today and take a snapshot and say, this is what blue is, this is what orange is, this is what green is. We have to look at societies developing from one stage to another and understand what they faced, what happened, and then how did they move from here to here, and when did they progress, and when did they regress, and what was the reason and the situation that allowed them to progress, and when did they get stuck. And just on a side note from what you said here, I remembered a quote from Russ Hudson through John Anthony West. So John Anthony West was an American who was an archaeologist, an Egyptologist, and lived in Egypt for a while. And his main sentence was, the West, unfortunately, when they narrate history, they tend to draw a line between where Western history starts and what was before that. It's as if Western history happened. So he talks about the Greeks and how the West always talks about the Greeks and Plato and Socrates and Pythagoras and the Greek. And this is like, these are the ones that started the civilization. It's as if this is the civilization and this is the notion. But what did the Greeks build upon? Did the Greeks start from scratch? Why was the greatest city of Greece, the city of the Greek civilization, the city of knowledge, the city of education, the universities, their great library, why was it in Alexandria? Did you ever ask yourself, why wasn't it in Athens? Why wasn't it in Sparta? Why was it in Alexandria? Because by the time the Greeks came, there was already a 3,000-year-old Egyptian civilization that had done so much to the world, and they were like taking from that very wealthy, rich civilization and building upon it. So human history is a line. No one has a favor over anyone. It is a developmental process. I call it like a relay race. Everyone runs a bit, and then by the time they get tired, they pass on the baton to the next runner. The next runner takes it, runs with it a bit, gives human civilization lots of gifts and then passes it on. So when we say that rational started from here in the West in the 15th century, just like that, Galileo woke up one day, let's be rational. Copernicus was sitting, I'm a believer, you know something, let's think. Why should we just follow? Copernicus, Galileo, Descartes, all this 15th and 14th century Renaissance that is called, was actually built on what? Where did they get the Greek manuscripts from? Have you asked yourself? So we have the Greeks, the Neoplatonians, and then a disappearance of history, and then a Renaissance. What happened in the Dark Ages?
Well, we now know that that was actually brought through Islam, through Spain,
Exactly.
to the north.
What happened is, in the 8th century of Baghdad, Al-Ma'mun and the Abbasids, when they had this powerful might and stability, they started establishing houses of knowledge and understanding, and the greatest among them was something called the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. That's why Baghdad was the light of the world at that time. And he got all kinds of knowledgeable astronomers and medical people and scientists and in all kinds of optics, and they studied biology, and it was a rational university in all the modern sense. And once you start to establish one part of a new stage, the other parts naturally emerge. So when you had the philosophers, you started having, for example, in the West, the Industrial Revolution, you started having the universities, and that's what happened. Once he established that culture, it started affecting everything in the people's life at that time in the 9th century. That's in the 9th century. That is, we're talking 1,200 years ago, 830 something, I guess. And even in the religious part, we started having religious schools in Islam from the rational perspective, which we call them today the Mu'tazilites. I'tazala in Arabic means they took a side. These are the people that told the mythic people, we don't accept what you're saying. We need to understand, we need to reinterpret, and they took a side and they created their own school of rational, modern thinking about the past. And they are, I would say, a result of the rational thinking that started taking over Baghdad at that time. A couple of hundred years later, we have Andalus, Spain, and an even bigger renaissance happening there, and all the great philosophers coming up there, and the translation movement, and the envoys that used to come from all over Europe that was at that time in a terrible state, the 100-Year War and the 30-Year War, but these were a bit later, all that happening, and they are taking and translating. And one of the Pope Sylvester was actually one of the people who used to go to Andalus to translate the manuscripts and translate the knowledge and bring in all the philosophies of the Arabs and the philosophies of the Greeks. And it is this that continued the baton and started appearing in the European Renaissance. There was a group of those very early Renaissance thinkers, they called themselves the Averroesians. You know what Averroes is? Averroes is Ibn Rushd, the great Andalusian philosopher, who at that time, he was a friend of Moses Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher. And Thomas Aquinas came very little after them, the great Christian philosopher. It was a place of plurality. And I sent today to Martin a lovely chart that was done by Said Dawlabani. He was like very close to Don Beck, who made the spiral dynamics. And he was showing the mimetic change of the Islamic civilization. And this period that I'm talking about has a very clear green layer, very thick orange layer, but then of course the bulk is in blue. So again, you have a distribution. So what happens when you look at this progress? And I think if the West doesn't wake up to these dynamics, the same thing is going to happen again, because history just repeats itself. To have a rational stage, what is the requirement, the sociological, the economic requirement. The requirement for the appearance of a rational stage is a stable political system in mythic. You need stability and you need funding of universities and funding a bureaucratic system in mythic. It doesn't have to be religious, but you need a very strong bureaucratic system, which, by the way, the West has today. All the organizations are built on this very strong bureaucratic system that allows stability so that these people can get the funding to do their research, build their universities. And this is actually what happened to the rational stage in both Baghdad and Andalus. When did Baghdad's rational stage collapse? Anyone know? With the Mongol invasions. So the Mongols came in and wiped out Baghdad and threw all the books and the knowledge into the river. And Baghdad automatically fell down because, again, of the lack of stability. They fell down even below mythic. You fall into egocentral mythic in that stage, in this area. Andalus, with the collapse of the Andalusian civilization and the princes escaping and the Inquisition that happened, again, this civilization collapsed in Andalus. And it's at that time that there was this big, as usual, this big struggle between rational and mythic. So in both the East and the West, with a difference of like 600 years, for rational to emerge, it had to struggle a lot with mythic that doesn't want to change. So one of the characteristics of mythic, this is the truth. Okay? Don't change. We don't want any change. And rational is saying, I want to find out for myself. I want to know for myself. You're heretic. The best example we have, it's not the only example. In the East, we have tons of these examples, but this is the best documented one, is Galileo. I mean, when I was young, I used to ask, so why was the church so angry that Galileo said the earth is around the sun, not the sun around the earth? And actually, that was not the problem. The problem was that Galileo even saw that there are moons around Jupiter. I mean, it's like, why is the church angry? It's because in the mythic, everything revolves around us. This is all the mythic, by the way, in Islamic Christianity, in all of them. Everything around us. It's like everything is created for us. The human ego is so big that everything has to be, and we are the center, and then our mythic belief is the center of the center. And then I am the center of all the centers. So this is the mythic, no change. While the rational wants to change. Now, as long as there is a stable system here that can protect and fund these people emerge. That's why they emerged. They emerged, as I said, in Baghdad, Andalus, and not just there. They emerged in many other places. China in the 13th century had a very strong rational movement. But if this system collapses, this regresses, this falls back. Okay, so the requirement here is a stable system here. What's the requirement for the pluralistic to show up? Ironically. So pluralistic is about living natural and living simple and going back to nature and loving each other and being sensitive each other. I'll say it in a funny way and then I'll say it in an official way. We need to have the luxury to afford being pluralistic. If we do not prosper in rational, we cannot be pluralistic. It costs so much to be poor. It costs a lot to live a simple life. I have to know that there's healthcare provided for me. I have to know that I can lean back on something if life gets tough. I know there's a system that is prosperous. There's a system that is prosperous. So if the system is there but it's not prosperous, green will regress, will fall back. There will be a struggle for needs. We might even fall back all the way down to egocentric. So this is not a linear march. This is a very flexible, dynamic movement. And we go up and we go down. Democracy, I mean, I'm not into politics much. And many times Martin tried to drag me to discuss democracy. And I don't discuss democracy. I know nothing about democracy. But he mentioned women's voting. I mean, even the West, the democratic orange West, when did it give voting rights to women? It's just less than 100 years ago. It's just in the last century. Most of the nations between 1910 and 1927, I think, and then up to 1950.
Even 70. Yeah.
Even 70. So just like 100 years ago. So can we claim that before that there was no orange or no rationality or no green? This is not the point, no. But the point is that pluralistic requires thriving in rational. Rational requires stability in mythic. The connection here. And the wave goes up and down. Look at politics in the US today. What's happening?
Yeah. I just want to
Yeah.
mention, check briefly what you said today,
Yeah.
is that we also need to see the pathologies of the previous level clearly before the next level can
appear.
really emerge out of that. And what you mentioned today is that in most Eastern countries, they're still so like moving into the rational stage, right? And building that. And the pathologies are, at least to the people in these countries, not
the same pathology.
Not apparent yet
It's
to the
not-
same extent.
Yeah, so there are two things.
Maybe intellectually, but
Yeah. So that is the historical part. So it's not really that, and rational appeared in the 15th century in the West. That is totally not true. Now, the other side of the argument is that what now Martin actually mentioned. How does a stage look like when it emerges from a previous stage? If we're in mythic, everything is stable, everything is fine, we're living
Under control, right?
everything is under control, we're living a good life, we're all prosperous, we don't have many problems, we're enjoying ourselves. Why would we go to rational?
By
If-
asking.
Yeah, sorry?
By asking.
By asking, you cause disturbance. Unless rational will bring you something that will be higher than the life that you're living in mythic, most people will actually try to prevent you from going ahead. So the pathologies of what you're living in have to be evident, so that by trying to solve these pathologies, you come up with different solutions. These different solutions do not come from the same stage, so you will keep trying to solve everything from the same stage. You try to solve from the same stage, and it's not, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it works, and then you reach a point where this is not working. We have to look at these problems in a different way. And only when you can stand and say that does a shift happen. On an individual, on a collective in your life, and on a collective in your society, that this is a requirement. But the point is that this new stage will depend in its manifestation on the problems that you were solving in the previous stage. And that's why how it looks like will be very different. And we had this was to me like, wow, when we talked about it today in the restaurant, about environmental issues. How can you say these people are green and I don't see any one of them an environmental activist? Well, because you guys messed up the environment. You guys, London was uninhabitable in the end of the 19th century. It was black. One of the examples that they study in about evolution is a kind of moth that stands on the trees that comes in two mutations, black and gray. And the gray one used to be more prevalent in London, grayish white, because it could camouflage with the tree, while the black was so evident that it would be taken. So most of this moth in London was the gray moth. By the end of the 19th century, the trees had become so black that the gray variety was going extinct because now it was standing out and the black variety was everywhere. Can you imagine how polluted London was at the end of the we're talking 1880s. So there was a huge disaster of destroying the environment that happened in the industrial age in Western Europe and in the States. And people started feeling it. People started seeing the problem. In the 1920s, I was a professor of energy for a while in university. And I used to say, until the 1970s, you know what the motto the motto, the statement, when people talk about pollution, the motto was the solution for pollution is dilution. Just dilute it. You have pollution in a factory, put a big fan, and then it will dilute it outside. You have a problem in something, just dump it into the river and it get diluted into the river. And then we had, of course, all kinds of disasters. Nature couldn't catch up. Now, we didn't have these problems. We didn't go through that phase. So why would we be activists in something that we don't even face? It's not a problem we're trying to solve. So what is green trying to solve? Now, the other thing that Martin, and I will come to the answer of that in a moment, it will appear from this discussion. I think Martin said that's also a magnificent realization here. I've been saying this for a long time, and I've been having lots of pushback sometimes, but again, I see it so clearly, so I don't mind. The West transcended with a lot of exclusions, a lot of allergies. Like, we don't talk about God. We don't talk about religion. We don't talk about family values. We don't talk about this. No. So to go to rational, and again, I would talk about this historically from the 15th century, basically around Descartes and Galileo and Copernicus and that area, and how there was a big struggle here between the church and the new scientific movement that was coming up, and the only solution was cut them out. You go your way, we'll go our way.
Yeah, Darwin, of course, and also
Darwin and Newton and all that. So there was all this huge struggle going on. So there was an allergy. So again, it's historic. It's not about these are good people and these are bad people. It's like everything can be understood when you look at the developmental process that happened over the ages. While in the East, if any one of you reads philosophy and knows Al-Ghazali and knows Ibn Sina and knows Ibn Rushd, there was 100 years, come on, these were 500 years. The Islamic Renaissance was something like 500 years. So you had Al-Farabi, one of the first rationalists, and then you had Ibn Sina, and then you had Al-Ghazali, who was very traditional, great guy, but very mythic. He wrote Tahafut al-Falasifa. Tahafut is the incoherence of the philosophers. Basically, it's a book saying that these rational thinkers are crazy, and they are destroying religion, and they're all wrong. And even when you go in and look, magnificent analysis. So he's using philosophy to discredit philosophers. And it's like one of the ironies of this book. He's a magnificent philosopher in mythic. And he says people are kafir for very strange things. It's like for believing that resurrection will not be with the body. So it's very mythic. So Ibn Rushd answers him back with the incoherence of the incoherence. So his book is Incoherence, Tahafut al-Falasifa. So he answers with Tahafut al-Tahafut. It's like this book is incoherent. Of course, they don't realize that they're talking from two different stages. But what was the end of this? The end in the West was a split. The end in the East, because of the Mongol invasions on Baghdad, and a bit later, the collapse of Andalus because of the Inquisition and the Feringa, we call it, and the taking over of Andalus and the collapse of these regimes, was a fall back to mythic.
I just want to alert you a little bit to time.
I
know you can philosophize about history for 3 hours.
I'll just take 2 minutes.
It feels like 3 minutes to you. But
okay, just 2 more minutes.
We have a bunch of more points.
So what happened is the East fell back to mythic. And now in its growth, it's not growing organically. Orange, when it grew in the past in the East, was organic. Orange, when it grew in the West in the 15th and the 14th and the 16th century, was organic. But today, orange is not organic. It's not coming, meaning that we have faced problems and we tried to solve them and we found our own orange. It's actually, we are now so close, the world is so close that these orange values and then the green values are so prevalent among us that those who have enough stability in mythic, had a good education, had a good way of growing up, had a good chance, were able to move into a rational that was adopted from the West and, let's say, put in an Eastern context. So what happened is we adopted orange while holding on to a lot of our mythic. And then those people in the rational, especially in Turkey and in Egypt, I think is very similar condition. There was this huge surge of rational in the 70s and 80s of last century. And in that surge, many people became very affluent. These people are the extremely orange entrepreneurs and billionaires and all that, but they're stuck in orange. Where did green come from? You find green in their second generation. The kids of these very affluent societies, so again, Martin was talking about what are the conditions that allow for orange and green to appear. These are the conditions. So if you look at my presentation about stages of the mind at the IEC, I say, you want to see where green is? Go to the kids of the very affluent orange stage that was created in the 70s and the 80s. You'll find that the entire society there is green. The university I studied in the 90s was still very orange, moving into green. Today it's like a huge green enclave in the center of Cairo. Because it was a very expensive university, and these are the kids of these people, and these are the ones that can afford to be green. They can afford to be poor because they know that daddy is going to send me the BMW to catch me whenever I have a problem. That's where the green is. So, but that green was not solving the problems of environment. That green was solving the problems of dogma, of being stuck in the one right way. That green was solving the problem of being pushed to be rational, to make money and to succeed and to run when I see that I haven't seen my parents because they've been working their whole life. I don't want to be like them. So that green is built on lack of greed, on sensitivity. I mean, when we read here the words about green, all these words apply. But it's not about environment, it's not about being vegetarian, it's not about, but they go into all the new age and discovering new ways and integrating religions together and being tolerant and being loving. It's a very, very powerful green. It just came up in very different situations and provided a very different manifestation. So that's the core of the argument for the time.
Yeah, so that's one. Thank you, Khaled.
Yeah.
And so that's why I still cannot see that type of green that you're describing, and I also don't see it here in Turkey. So that will be something for me to
Observe, maybe
to observe and to look. And one thing that you said today, which was somewhat eye-opening, is what I call New Age green. Right? People here are into Osho, they're into NLP, they're into Reiki, they're into regression therapy. But this is, and we cannot go into the details, what we integral people would call a lot of pre-trans fallacy. So this is like a lot of magical thinking, the law of attraction, karma, all that stuff is really a conflation between the second stage and the sixth stage. Yeah. And that's not so like my green, because when the rivers got polluted and the forests were dying in Germany was when I was a young student of high voltage electricity and nuclear power plants and stuff like that. So I was very much part of that, where the Germans woke up and said, we cannot continue like that, otherwise our country will be basically a dump, right? Our fish are all dying, our forests are all dying, we need to do something. So it came out from a very different situation as where Turkey or countries in the Middle East are, and that leads us to this whole global warming debate and whatnot. And so that's why I still cannot really see my type of green. And then my other type of green is, of course, I like this free love green, right? We can all run around naked in the forest and we can have sex with whoever we want, or even get naked here, right? And stuff like that. And I learned the hard way that this is not a type of green that that is
a green that
here.
has excluded family value and morality of blue and purple. Yeah.
And on the other side, where I'm very critical, just for many years, is in a way that the rational stage is I say we integral, right, people. So Wilbur is very clear. Most of all integral people that I know are very clear that this rational stage emerged in 1500. There was, in that sense, in a scientific, modern, democratic, liberated sense, no green before. And we also disagree about that evolution is cyclical. So we see evolution as linear, right? And so where I feel drawn to this culture, right, is this preservation of the relationality, family values. This is still much more pronounced here, while you go into rational. But I don't think this development is finished here. So I see more and more that women here don't want to have children. They're in serial monogamy or don't want to have relationships at all. They start to live alone. So a lot of these things that happened in the West, from my experience 30, 40, 50 years ago, start happening too. But there is a much stronger pull from the society to say, no, you cannot do that, right? And so I still sense this tension between mythic and rational here in a different way now. And I agree with you. What we see in America is there's like the rational is now collapsing because of the hyper-individualism, and more and more people are returning to what we call Trumpism, or more of this autocratic mythic. So and that also has to do with birth rate. So we're not going to go into these details, but so I hope we can somehow continue this dialogue. I don't know if we can really solve. I often say, no, we solved all the problems in the world today. What did you do, right? But nobody's listening, or hardly anyone is listening. Yeah. But I think this transcend and include thing is a really important issue that needs to be revisited, and we need to learn. We Westerners need to learn more about, how you deal with this, and I think you Easterners, so to speak, can learn a lot from the mistakes that we made in the West, but also from the things that went right, right? Because only if we solve these problems together, we're now in a globalized world, can we move forward as a humanity, right? And
I agree with that there's a lot that we should learn about what went right and what went wrong.
Yeah.
And I also agree that this is not the end of the discussion. This is just the start of a fascinating discussion that I hope it does expand.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe we can give chance for questions or something. Yeah.
So one question, I just want to read these questions again and see what we touched on. So after Egypt, when I came back, these are the questions that I wrote down. The first one we already addressed, was what effect did the importing of Western technology and values have on emerging societies that did not invent these technologies, right? The iPhone and the car and pretty much all modern technology that is used. When I see buildings built here, they have German trucks, they have German cranes, they have German architects, right? So this never happened in the West, right? That until it happened in the 9th century.
In the 15th century, in the 14th century.
Before then, right, the West imported
from the East.
From the East, right? That's what I said. None of that emerged above that line emerged in the West, right? But then the tide started to change, and the East imported at least a lot of technology and some values, right? Some ideas from the West. But it did not organically grow there, just as in the West, these previous stages did not organically grow. And I think that's why the West is often so unstable, because it doesn't have this stable foundation of these earlier stages. And what effect this has on the East is importing, right? So that is just, we cannot get to the bottom of it, but I just want to put this out as a question.
And it's very important to look at the answer of this, because it creates, as you said, different tensions in both sides. Yeah. So all the exclusions that the West had to do in order to go to rational and plural created this instability of family values and moral systems that are creating some kind of a loss in relational values. While in the East, we imported something that's not ours, and we're trying to adapt it even in mythic. So as you said, now when we have a mobile phone, which we didn't invent, it didn't come out of our knowledge, how will mythic apply it? How will egocentric apply it? And that creates all kinds of tensions and pathologies in the society
And we're not even talking about nuclear bombs and
Yeah,
and modern
exactly.
weapons
Yeah.
and stuff like
Yeah.
that, right?
So that creates
In
so
the
many,
hands of mythic.
and these are the tensions in the society that we see today in our Eastern societies. When you look at the society, you find there are so many directions the society is going in. And some people want to totally adapt the Western system as it is, and some people totally reject everything coming from the West, although they live in Western houses and turn on the air conditions when it's cold, when it's hot, but they want to reject everything from the West. Okay, and both of these are impossible. You can neither reject it all nor accept it all. You need to work on a good educational system that will help people move into rational. You need to work on the basic rights of the people, reaching them, the basic needs, everyone living a decent human life, so that now when they move up, they don't adopt the Western manifestations of rational. They adopt the Western, or let's say the stage drives of rational, and then it will come in a very beautiful way out of their culture that did not delete out these. And again, this is the baton that I say keeps on passing between East and West. If you look for the last 5,000-6,000 years, the baton is just going back and forth. A civilization goes up, matures, loses its way, passes on to the next one, and collapses. This one matures, becomes arrogant enough. We are the best in the world. Once they start saying that, then they start passing the baton and collapsing. And it just keeps on. So it's not a matter of cyclical. It's a matter of civilizations go in waves. But the overall progression of consciousness collectively, in my belief, is a continuous improvement, but it doesn't go up like this. It goes up like this.
Sure. So I think the jury is kind of out on that one.
Yeah.
And I'm too old probably to see the results, as I often say. Right? And so, from my ignorant Western perspective, we know about the Arab Spring, and there was a lot of hope in the West, right? And then you were part of that. And, I think a lot of people in the West are still flabbergasted. Why didn't that catch on? Because to us, that made so much sense. That's progress. That's what everybody wants, right? And that's, again, that's what we're basically talking about. What are these tensions? And of course, the Democrats in America are still flabbergasted how Trump could become president, right? And everybody's learning in a way. So this is not only happening here, but the dynamics are different. So I just put out this question, and I'm aware of time. Is an authentic, organic, and unique emergence of modern and higher stages in emerging societies possible, and how would that look? So this is just a hypothetical question, because we agree about this importing and what has organically grown where and what has been adopted. I mean, I just want to say that about Far Eastern traditions, like Buddhism specifically, but Taoism and the tantric, that has also been adopted in the West in a very distorted and very superficial, and
because it wasn't organic from
it did
within.
never grow organically there, right? Zen Center in San Francisco opened in the 70s, and there was one teacher coming over, and he taught a little bit, and then the New Agers there, the hippies, they went like, okay, now we're all Buddhists,
yeah.
and we're all tantric practitioners, right? And I mean, it's completely not rooted in anything, right? Yeah. So that happens in both ways.
So we can have sex
and
call it spirituality. Hooray!
Right, hooray! Yeah, right. And just forget about the 30-year preliminary practice, right? We go right to and we don't want to really work too hard. We want to just get enlightened. Just read a book and understand about enlightenment, and then you're enlightened. Forget the practice, right? And so this is just like that. This goes in both ways. That this importing of values or practices, things from other cultures, and not organically grown. I think that's an interesting question to explore. And those who are listening, if you want to write a PhD, here is probably we already gave like at least 20 suggestions for
topics for study,
for PhD theses and study. And so another question that I raised is, to what extent is understanding and experience necessary and even possible in certain contexts for knowledge and embodiment of an emerging developmental stage? Right? Is reading about the rational stage or reading about pluralism and then being able to talk about it and philosophically understand it, etc. But you have basically very little or no experience. It goes the other way around, right? Some people have all kinds of experiences, but they have no idea to explain what just happened or why is that happening.
It's your life decisions, it's your how you're living and what you're doing that defines the stage, not your ability to talk about it.
Yeah.
When you're really facing a situation, what do you do? And it's not when you're in leisure just sitting and, when I was yellow in the past, and come on, I'll teach you turquoise. And no, it's not like that. It's like, how are you really living when you're challenged, not when you're at leisure.
Yeah. So that's another question I was raising here. And so I think a big topic that we already started with is this: what should be transcended and what should be included. So I don't know if you want to reflect on that a little bit more.
I think we basically covered it, that the East today is holding on to a lot of the previous stages while trying to move to the new stages, which is causing what we call addictions. We're holding on to things, and in this holding on, we are maintaining lots of what these need to give, while also maintaining their limitations. While the West did the opposite, was so fed up of these preventing them from moving on, that they just threw away the baby with the wash water. Everything, the good and the bad. But each one of these has so much to give us, and without integrating the good in it, we lose so much. It's like we lose human history, we lose human evolution. Here we have the family values. Here we have the power to stand and express ourselves and have boundaries. Here we have the moral systems and the systems that can give us stability in society. This is what builds society. If we don't have these, we get to see what happens. The ultra-individualism and the lack of any code, and that all codes are equal, all this happens because you lose this. So the East held on to that with its pathologies. A lot of it, of course. And today the struggle in the East is, how can we move on and let go of the pathologies without losing the great value in these stages? This is, I think, the struggle that's going on in the East today. While in the West, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Searching for a moral code, searching for family values, searching for some kind of stability in society.
Yeah. So what I notice, so really around like women's rights, for example, that also in our discussion, right, where from a Western perspective, we often still feel that women are repressed here or forced into certain behaviors or things that you're not allowed to do, and you said today that there's actually much more freedom for women here to choose
Than
certain
the
things
West
that,
usually thinks. Yeah.
that we think in the West.
Yeah.
And maybe we have a bunch of women here
That would prove that.
would also be
Yeah.
interesting to hear. And of course, we know in Saudi Arabia,
We're not talking about, of course, extreme regimes and extreme areas. We're talking actually, I would say, about Turkey and Egypt.
Yeah, okay.
Turkey and Egypt would be the best examples of this.
Yeah. So you having the right to rent your own apartment and to live by yourself, for example, right?
And to wear the hijab or not wear the hijab.
Yeah.
It's like it's a choice.
I'm living with my boyfriend, and my mom just ordered me to come and get, and I have the tattoos, I have my choice. I was a Buddhist for a while, and she was totally fine with that. And I had to choose everything that I was looking in my view, and I just got a really big difference what the Turkish thinks and what we're supposed to be like. That we have big differences, like two sides in here. So I can't see clear right now what you are talking about. Like I seriously never thought of it like that before, because I was just like in the maybe rational or like pluralistic way. But now I see where am I right now and I'm supposed to be like in that way.
So there is still, you see some tension
Yeah.
for you living with your boyfriend,
I mean-
not being married, I
I
assume.
mean, not for everybody, but
Yeah.
when I come with my aunts or like
Mhm.
when I come with the older generation, they like asking, "Oh, are you planning to get married? Or like, are you like working together, or just are you just like gonna separate again, or just gonna live together?" And I'm like, "No, we're just living right now. Like, it's the thing. Like, we're not gonna get married, or just we don't have to get married." But they just, I can see differences by ages actually.
Especially
Yeah.
through age. Uh-huh.
But you cannot see this kind of examples in east of Turkey, of course. Yeah, I mean,
Where it'll be much more mythic there.
yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
You could not do it
Much
in
more
the East,
traditional,
or you
yeah.
would you have to
This is
hide
kind of
more.
examples
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Istanbul, Izmir, Ankara, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're living in a really good stage.
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, I already mentioned that, and of course, we know that there is enclaves, Izmir and Istanbul and Ankara are much more liberal, just in the US, where certain cities and areas are more liberal. And then another topic here, I think that I noticed was around homosexuality. So I know some homosexual men, and they go like, "Shh, don't tell anyone." And I think there were some protests, right, and in some universities that were basically squashed, right?
I was telling Martin, my first experience in Turkey, I think that was in 2014 or 15. I was with my wife. The first day we arrived to Turkey, we were in Istiklal Street, and there was a gay pride march.
Yeah.
And that was the first day I come to Turkey. It's like, wow, this is Turkey?
I really hope that you come back after that.
So that's no longer happening, right?
No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
I have a gay best friend, and they living together in a house, and they just like moving around and being like normal, like holding hands in some parts of Istanbul. And in this time, we have really much, especially teenagers, they expressing themselves so like easily. Actually, this is a thing. Like when somebody say it's a gay, like, "Oh, you're gay, so this is nice." We're just having these expressions to them to feel kind of relaxed. So it's opposite now. Before that, it was just like a kind of getting shy and stuff, but now it's like courage. It's a pride to be gay for them. This is how it works in here.
Actually, it has changed in maybe a couple of years.
Yeah.
Before that, like some of them were killed, and many transsexual persons, murdered. So now they are more free to explain themselves.
Yeah, everything has changed in this 5 years in here. It's totally different edges. I can tell. Like, I live in the States for a while, and I come here and I see that the one side are living like European, but at the corner European, but the other side rationals are like in the middle, and the mythics are in the different level.
Anyone else has a question or a comment?
I want to say something about the homosexuality. You know, we keep
About what? Sorry.
homosexuality.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I don't want to just go out of the topic, but you guys keep talking about the freedom, that it's a freedom and etc. I think we need to talk about what is freedom here. Like maybe we need to describe what is freedom. So there are a lot of things, like a lot of movies, TV shows, singers, like too many stuff, especially social media, and they're imposing that homosexuality. And I see kids, like you said, teenagers, like 13, 15, 16-year-old guys or girls, and they think they're gay or they're homosexual. Are they really? We don't know. So is that a freedom? So I think we need to talk about that. Is that the really freedom? So maybe it's not a freedom, maybe it's a brainwashing thing, Maybe we see it as a freedom because Western like civilization just tells us that this is a freedom. Maybe actually that's not a freedom, but the normal way of being in a relationship, which is just man and woman, is natural way, and homosexuality is not natural. So people keep saying that homosexuals or homosexuality, it's a kind of minority. I don't think it's a minority. Maybe number-wise they're a minority, but like
Their power in media is not a minority.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's say so in US now homosexuals, they can get married, right?
Yeah.
And they can get married in the church, right? And what if that guy, what we call priest, doesn't want to marry them? What's going to happen to him?
He gets sued.
You see? So what is freedom here? That's not freedom.
Actually,
So those people, they get their freedom, but they basically take their freedom. right?
Yeah, that's of
But
course the.
I have right to say that I'm not supporting homosexuality, and I do not actually. But when I say that, people treat me like I'm an ignorant person. You see? So
Depending on what level of consciousness they are,
yeah, well,
more or
yeah,
less.
right.
Yes.
And when I say I'm against homosexuality, I'm not saying let's kill those gay people. No, it's not. I'm not against
Yeah.
homosexuals, but I'm against that homosexuality. And yeah.
And what you're saying is amazing, really. It really is a very, very important point, and it goes again to show this transcend with exclude and transcend with include. And it's also happening because this movement is also something that didn't grow organically. It's also an imported, imposed, as you say, movement. So it's not coming from the culture, and that's why it's creating all these tensions. It even created huge tensions in the cultures it came out of. It's like, when were they able actually to come out? And it's just like in the last 20 years. Even in the 90s, it wasn't possible. So it's not like it's something that the West has had forever and just now we're discovering it. It is a very strong media power and media push. And as long as it's not coming organically, it will always have a huge resistance and a huge problem. This imposing of a system that isn't coming from within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a little experience a few days ago. My neighbors across the on the other side, for the first time I kind of had contact with their little girl, and she speaks fluently English, fluently, and her mom and her father, they don't speak any English. And I said, where did you learn to speak English? I said, on YouTube. And of course, she's not just taking English lessons
No.
on YouTube. She watches YouTube's video
The whole culture.
that also represent probably largely Western culture, right? And so she's not only adopting the language, but also some of these ideas, these values.
And that's why, as you said, it's generational from one extent, and it's also affluence, capacities, capabilities. She has the option, the capacity to sit and watch YouTube for hours, while another kid who doesn't have this feature will not adapt that. So it's also contextual depending on affluence and availability of needs and resources.
So I haven't fundamentally changed my views on certain things, but what I really learned in a totally new and deep way is this really listening to each other.
Yeah.
And these dialogues, I don't know where they happen, but I don't see them really happening on that level in the integral community, and probably not in a lot of areas of the East and West kind of working together or not working together. And it will just be interesting to see for me how this will continue to evolve in the East here, right? This tension between the mythic and the rational, and if there.
And what's happening in the West also, there's a lot happening in the
This
West
is also
too.
happening in the West, of course. Yeah.
I want to add something is, which I see right now, I think is the thing that we're just getting the higher rates or higher generation is rejecting the originality. We're just affecting from the West or East, but this is originally grown up something because the century is changing, like people are changing, the minds are changing. So just accepting this stuff by happening itself without forcing or shoving the media, like tell them or expressing their feelings. It's not a freedom maybe, but it's the originality because they have the ability to talk about their thoughts. It's never been happened before. Like for being a gay or homosexual, I know my mom's friend, he was gay, but he had to get a marriage and he had to get a child. But for now, I'm asking him, and he was like, I was gay. I didn't see anyone like me. So he didn't get inspired from anyone. He was just like that inherently. But he had a chance to express his feelings. For me, in this different stages of that, this is the main rejection in Turkey. We don't accept that. It's gonna ruin our culture. We're gonna lose our culture by just getting from the commercials or ads, but this is not my idea. getting inherently. So we need to improve and make a space for that. But yeah, there's lots of like, other sizes. They're just trying to make it in different ways. I'm not talking about that, but as a thing for me, I can see it as a rejection. The main thing for here.
Yeah.
I guess.
So, anything comes up for you? What else we discussed?
Oh, I've talked a lot.
No, it's an invitation. We still have 5 minutes.
I'm okay. Any questions on the chat?
We have only one question. One of them great overview to say you, Khaled. Are there publications on the topic of the higher dynamic consciousness evolution? And if not, wouldn't it be important to publish these insights?
That's very important. Yeah, I mean, as I always tell Martin, I lack in publications. I talk more than I publish, so I need to start doing that. And maybe we can publish this discussion itself. I mean, I was thinking of this last night. This huge discussion that we'd have. I think we should write an article about this discussion.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
So thank you for the suggestion, and totally right. Yeah.
So another thing that I'm still exploring and curious is, you talk a lot about the heart, right? And that comes, I assume, a little bit so like from Sufism, right? And
the region in general is very connected to the heart. I mean, our cultures in general have a big heart.
yeah,
And things always come back to the heart. And that's why spirituality is close to us.
and
It's there. Regardless of what stage we're at, we're connected to the heart. It's not something that we have to reject or accept, and that's why it'll just look different in different stages. So maybe this is where it's coming from. I don't know. As I told you, I don't know, but I think it's coming from this. Yeah.
And so when I look at the spirituality that the West imported from India and Tibet, and it's very what we call ascending, getting away from the body, from emotions, from transcending until you are in pure emptiness. So I never read anything in any integral books about the heart, right? It was just like, this is just like feeling stuff, right? We don't want to deal with that. And so we also have and that would open a whole different discussion about what's called the Wilbur-Combs matrix or lattice, where this is basically ego building or complexity building, right? More complexity, more integration, and then we have the transcendence, the disidentifying, or the whole spiritual awakening path, which can happen at all of these levels, and what you are working on or already spelled out is this. What do you call it?
The lattice. There should be
the
lattice.
heart.
Heart-mind relation.
Heart-mind relation, and also that you say certain levels can only emerge if also your spiritual development or your heart-mind relation has developed to a certain extent. And
otherwise it becomes a pathological cognitive state.
Yeah. And most of the Westerners, there are some people who also conflate these two. They say these are two
Totally
completely
separate.
Independent developmental lines, which I'm a proponent of. So this is also
but that's a totally different discussion.
a topic where we explored and where I try to better understand what you even mean and where this comes from, right? So that is another topic that we will also address here in our groups at some point. And so so I think that's it, and our time is up, or at least our official Zoom time. So I'm just trying to think of one more little anecdote. So one little anecdote that sticks with me, because you told me twice already. is the thing about meditating and praying, right? Remember the woman who said you're mythic because you go to the mosque and you pray, and you said, oh no,
praying, yes, brain. I heard it praying, yes,
you're
yes.
praying and praying, not praying
Yeah.
on her, praying,
Yeah.
right? You want to share that real quick?
Yeah, so I had invited a woman to give us a course on spiral dynamics in Egypt, and she had nothing, she didn't know anything about the culture, she didn't live here like Martin, and I was trying to give her some heads up, be careful of this. So she arrives and she starts teaching the stages, and this is egocentric, mythic, and then the prayer called, and we asked her, we need a 10-minute break because people need to pray. And almost all the students got up to pray. And she was sitting, very arrogant, very happy. Yeah, see, I told you, you're all mythic. Why are we all mythic? See, you all got up to pray. You're all still stuck in mythic. None of you even is in rational. And I was like shocked. Again, it's like, why is she saying that? I mean, she herself knows it's not like that. And she later totally changed her mind. But at the moment, what are you talking about? And then in 2 days, I'm going to pick her up from the hotel. And I told her, I'll pick you up at such and such time. She said, no, half an hour later, because I need to do my meditation. So I told her, you meditate? She said, of course. I meditate every day in the morning and in the evening. I told her, so you're mythic also. She said, no, I'm not mythic. I am this, I am yellow, I am turquoise. But you're meditating, you're doing a prayer twice a day. This is different. What's different about it? So again, these things that get projected without realizing. I mean, the same lady, I must say, 2 years later, we were on another call, and a lady from Canada was talking to her and telling her, I need a green community, and I don't know where to find a green community. Do you know any? So the teacher was thinking for a while. So I told her, Debbie, let her come. She said, ironically, you know where you'll find the green community? Go to Khaled's community in Egypt. That's the same lady that was saying it was mythic a while ago. This is how, when the cultures interact and start to understand each other, start to see that there are differences. I think she came up with a very nice a statement, you would say. She said, I discovered in Egypt that clothed doesn't mean closed. Clothed doesn't mean closed, because she saw people that are veiled and not veiled, fully dressed and half dressed, and that had nothing to do with the stages. She meant closed-minded. Clothed doesn't mean closed-minded.
Yeah. And then from a Western perspective, right, I would say, well, there is still the muezzin who calls you, right? You still have buildings, religious buildings, mosques in this case, right? And there is a certain structure to your prayer that you have to follow physically and verbally, as you explained to me today. Yeah. And a Westerner would say this is still all mythic, right? You follow that, while I can meditate whenever I want. Nobody necessarily, right? I mean, I
and this is
except for very little things, kind of developed my own meditation practice.
Which is just what we said. Yeah. This is included from mythic, and it's not a limited view. Yeah. So it kept with the higher stages. So you'll find rational people praying in the same process, even pluralistic people praying in the same process, and that doesn't mean that they're stuck in mythic.
Yeah. But it can look like that, or there is a mythic
from
element to it.
From a Western perspective, it is included from mythic, just like the family. So if you have a wife and you have kids, does that mean you're purple? That's a structure, has rules. There's a father, there's a mother, there are kids. Does that mean you're purple?
But that's like our discussion, right?
See, that doesn't mean you're purple. That just means that this is a purple structure that was included from purple all the way up to integral. That doesn't mean you're stuck in purple because you have a family. It means that there's something beautiful in purple that is found very helpful and very beneficial even in the higher stages. So
But
why
it's
not
again
keep
not
it?
about the what, but the why, and how
Yeah.
much freedom is there, and what is the dynamic between the family members,
Yeah.
et cetera, which makes the difference, right? And so I would argue with this meditation, with this example, right, that there is still potentially a difference in, and that's this, what I see so like as a defensiveness, right, where
It would be if they are
where
forced,
both sides get
if
defensive.
they are forced to pray.
Yeah.
But no one is forced to pray. I mean, I would agree with you if there is a force, like what used to happen in Saudi Arabia, get up everyone, it's time to pray, you have to pray. But that doesn't happen in our countries. No one here who prays is forced to pray.
Yeah.
Some people will pray, some people will not pray.
Yeah.
So it's not really mythic. It's not like, oh my God, she's not praying. Look, she's going to burn in a moment. There's going to be a, she's gone.
Yeah.
This doesn't exist. It's just something that is giving healing to the heart.
So
in
this
a
is where we
certain
can
way
then
that
discuss for
remains.
2 hours,
Yeah.
right? Where
Yeah.
I disagree with that, right? I have a
Yeah.
different perspective on that.
But isn't it also about intention, the way, like how you pray or why you pray? So some people pray just because, how can I say it? Like it's like a physical practice for them and nothing more.
Like doing
Some-
yoga.
From gross, yeah.
But some people pray because they feel it. And how do you know that person? Like, let's say he prays only 10 minutes, and maybe he's in some kind of,
Right, that's the why question, right? You need to look deeper at the why question. And so,
And that why becomes very manifest in moving between stages. So I'll give an easier example, the veil, hijab. Hijab, the West takes it as a sign of mythic. But if it's a sign
and
of
repression
mythic,
of women.
and
also.
repression of women, because it's mythic.
Yeah.
But if it was like that, that means that all the women who move into rational will take off their veil. But that's not the situation. It all depends on, in mythic, why the woman put on the veil or didn't put it on.
Yeah, that I agree
Okay?
with. Yeah.
If in mythic she put it, although she's suffering and she doesn't want to put it, but she has to satisfy God and she wants to go to heaven, and this is the only way, although every day I'm crying because I don't want to put it on, but I want to go to heaven, as soon as she moves into rational, she will take it off. But if she put it because it brings peace to her heart, she feels covered, she knows she can take it off whenever she wants to take off, she's not repressed by society, this is something that's close to her. When she moves into rational, she might even do it in a better way. When she moves to pluralistic green, which we all see in the West as all the open sex, on the contrary, she might be, as we say, a messenger of peace in her veil that touches the hearts of everyone around her. But this has to be understood again, not like from a Western perspective. Look, they don't have free sex, so they're not green. That's a very imposing of a certain manifestation of values that will manifest in very different ways in very different places. As long as it's not imposed, as long as it's coming from within.
But we look way too much at the what and not at the why, right? And that goes both ways.
Yeah.
Because with the clothing, you could also then say, well, you're wearing Levi's jeans. Everybody's wearing Levi's jeans, right? You also kind of wear, that's not your free choice. You wear them because it's somehow societally imposed on you, right? So that would be like a counter argument. And then you could say, but,
I mean, even from a rational...
one historically was still invented by males that was then imposed on females, right? While in the West, maybe females design the clothes that women then have more choice and there's much more variety. And this is also like, I just want to give an example of the kind of
I'll give an example.
two perspectives.
Again, in clothing,
Yeah.
in rational.
Yeah.
Okay, the West sees the Eastern women being covered rationally a sign of repression, while the Western rational orange sees the uncovering and nakedness of the West as objectification of women.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, you're not beautiful and people are not going to look at you and you need to do that. That's a very rational perspective, but it gives different results.
Yeah. And I think that's, I just wanted to give an example of sort of like the difficulty of understanding the other side and to, because we need to understand more of the why, and we're so much looking at the what, right? And of course, I come and say, well, if you're not polyamorous, if you're not an environmentalist, if you're not vegetarian,
then you're not green.
Then you're not green, right? Because these
I
are
was
all
like, what?
these are all green qualities, right? And the list goes on, right? And of course, and if you're not caught up in all the pathologies of green, right, then you're not green, right? And so when you say, come to Egypt, you want to experience a green community, that's not what I experienced at all, right? And then now we're going over time, but you know, again, there were certain triggers.
I stopped. It's you this time.
Yeah, it's me this time. But I just, okay, and then I shut up. Just like why this had such an impact on me, and I tell this little story that this engineer, his wife had just left him, and he had a child, and he obviously was looking for some new, and he wanted to talk to me, and so we spent the flight from Luxor to Cairo, an hour flight together, and he told me, Martin, there's 3 problems in our society. And I went like, oh, wow, I'm all ear here, right? And he said, the first one is feminism. That's a problem in our society. The second one is homosexuality. And the third one is spirituality. And I was like, explain that to me. And I listened to him for 1 hour.
So that's a very mythic view. That's an extremely mythic view.
Yeah, but from an other perspective, right? If you just look what he does, right? He's an engineer. He seemed to be somewhat world-centric and quite educated and things like that. And this created sort of like this cognitive dissonance in me, right? To say, and I had a lot of these encounters where I felt sort of like this confusion where, you know, where I said, is that partly because what we talked about tonight, the transcending include versus transcendent exclude, the importing of certain Western ideas or the rejection of certain Western ideas, and always kind of like looking more at the what and not more deeply understanding the why. And then the topic that we haven't really talked about, but this is an ongoing discussion in our meetings here twice a week, is sort of like how does all this shift the relationship between males and females in your culture? That's why I'm here, right? And I'm not teaching you how to, I'm here to support the people in however I can with the experiences I had in adopting them, that I had in the West, right? And adopting them to your culture here. And that's a give and take, right? And that's why this is so helpful to understand things about polygamy that we talked about today. And I mean, I learned so much about in these few days. It's just like mind-boggling. So thank you very much for the respect that we have for each other and the openness
amazing conversations.
I can
really,
say
like
everything
so
to you, and you push back and you shower me with all your historical knowledge, and then I fight back. And I mean, this is how emergence happens.
Yes.
Right. And we look at more at the why and not only at the what. And that was the invitation tonight to partake a little bit in this and to start a broader conversation about that. And I hope that some integral people will watch that conversation and see that as an invitation to make integral really, to come back to my first statement, right? That what was the statement? Oh, it's not multicultural. It's basically white male American perspective on the world.
Western white male.
Western white male perspective, and that we open that up to integrate the perspectives of different cultures. So thank you again.
Thank you all, and thank you for everyone who joined us on Zoom.
Yeah. And who will watch the video.